Programming and reprogramming one's mind is literally something that I've been hearing about for so long. I've been saying things like this for far beyond my hearing of these two terms. And I've been saying that the mind is not different, but actually it's kind of the exact same with programming. See, many people nowadays come and speak about things that, everything is unconscious and one has to transcend unconsciousness. The whole universe functions based on an intelligence of its own. Everything in physicality functions by a rhythm, right? A cycle. The sun moves around the galactic core. The whole solar system moves around the star, irrespective of which solar system we speak about. And all our life is a set of cycles that we go through. Why is it actually that people say program your mind? The mind itself has a programming of its own. If one doesn't know how to use it, it will use them instead. Usually what most people's life is their past simply playing upon them. See, I've always said that the mind is technically exactly the same thing as an AI, as a program, a software on a computer. Now, what is a software on a computer? If we are to give the minutest, but at the same time shortest definition of it, and somewhat low-levelist, it is nothing else than a bunch of code that is constantly repeated again and again, and it only seeks the positive conditions, right? The conditions which are true, and executes the code which is within those. Everything that is false is simply denied. So there is a basic programming that decides when certain things are true, when certain things are false, and everything that is true is executed. And this code is repeated depending on need. Once in a few seconds, several times per second, several times per minute, depending on whatever the thing, requires in order to function. Some machines need to do a cycle every 1 hour, for example, or 1 day. Some cycles need to happen very fast. The same thing is with the mind. See, the mind is some place, let's say, where we store most of our emotions, right? Technically, emotions are nothing else than the outcome that we feel, right, towards certain things, right? How we react, right? So technically, anything that happens usually and always triggers an unconscious impulse. An unconscious impulse is technically a manifestation of how the body feels towards something. Say, in this world of duality, one either likes or dislikes something. Unconsciously speaking, that's how everyone will react. When something happens, people will either like or dislike it. If they react to that, they will either like it or dislike it. There is no other way. When people react in a more conscious approach, they can simply choose a neutral perspective. A neutral perspective means accepting both the positive and the negative influences of that event or whatever is, but not allowing those to happen. See, when one realizes awareness and consciousness of their mind, right, there is one simple point. Just like in programming, no process in a software happens or can happen, right? No such process within a software can happen without the system granting it the required resources. So no process can happen if they are not given the right amount of resources, because there is always a query and a receival, right? Every process within the software requires a certain amount of resources, right? And they are granted those by the system. When the system cannot grant them the necessary resources, that's when you have a so-called bottleneck, and that's what, leads to, lag or whatever, right? Spikes in the fluctuation of the working of the software, be it a game or whatever you want. The same thing is with the mind. No thought in your mind can function without you giving, consciously or usually unconsciously in most people's cases, the resources needed for them to function. When something happens enough times, you end up believing that it is normal to experience it again and again. When you experience that again and again, the point is you automatically end up giving that thing the resources needed to function. See? And they enter a, I would call it, demi-conscious level of awareness, because that's how people are in most cases. People simply go again and again through their past, and their past experiences come because everything that you go through, all your experiences, they create what is called your karma, right? The karmic structure holds within it the whole history of your existence. And the whole history of one's existence, obviously, well, is a storage of all their memories and literally everything that one can hold. Now, these memories, be it from past lives, be it from the current life, well, they will hold an influence. And as they hold an influence, people, if they are unconscious, they will live through those influences again and again, technically allowing their past to become their future. That is basically a cycle. Whatever you do, whatever you think, whatever you make, whatever action one takes, from breathing to more complex options, not that breathing isn't a complex one, but we're too superficial to observe that, everything has, let's call, an imprint. And just like in programming, everything has a dump file, right? Which is something that certain people who know how to work low level can access and see how a system or a software or whatever, a server, simply worked, what were the steps that were taken, and this is usually needed for, bug fixing, or fixing a certain set of errors, or finding out what went wrong in a certain situation. This is what I call backtracing. The same thing can be done with the mind. Now, some people can do this, especially if they're well trained, be it through, let's say, regression in time, as I call it, but people may misunderstand. So the mind and the unconscious simply store literally everything that you see, everything that you hear. To one's unconscious level, one can only realize a very small fraction because the brain removes usually 99% of the unneeded information. Usually what we attract in our conscious awareness, right, is basically what we focus on. This is selective processing, as I call it, because this is all about your intellect. If you are convinced that you suck, 1,000 people may be talking highly about you, but the brain will simply disregard those because you don't have that opinion of you, so it will be irrelevant to your intelligence, right? To your intellect. If someone's in those 1,000 people, or let's say 2 people, speak badly about you, most likely you'll hear those in the whole crowd, because that's what you're technically hearing. See, 1,000 people walking around you, you hear literally everything that they are talking. You might call yourself deaf because you can't hear all of them, but the brain is technically processing that which may sound the most important to it. That's why the brain will always be far more advanced than any machine we can create, because the brain can perform trillions of things, right, of, let's say, actions per second. See, why do you think they want to merge machines with humans, right? They always say they want to merge actually humans with machines, because you merge that which is better with that which is somewhat worse. Right? That's how my psychology perceives things, right? You want to combine something better with something worse to create something that is much more than a limitation. Because many people say that, well, the mind and the cyber can be combined perfectly, because technically programming and the cyber that we have today, they're nothing else than the machination and the coding of the mind. It took me years to realize this, but all that information was deeply hidden within me, and I required years of introspection to simply realize that. The mind functions by a code, well, a huge amount of codes, but the point is, the mind has a coding and a function which is very similar to AI and programming. That is why it is very easy to simply create the idea of transhumanism. Obviously, that's not going to be a good idea because compared, well, to what it may look like in movies, the point is it's only about control. We live in an unconscious, mostly unconscious society dominated by control and, enslaving others, how to exploit others. So the very simple question is, if you allow to others to upload or download your whole being into a machine and you become that machine, aren't you nothing else than another machine instead? You're not gonna have any freedom because other people will be able to control you entirely. This is the highest form of control, that where you are fully unconscious and you simply do only the commands that are given. No awareness, no anything, and well, that's kind of it. When it comes to programming and AI, that's what AI is. It is a bunch of code that simply will repeat itself. It has no evolution, it has no karmic structure, it has no adaptation. We humans, just like all other animals, needed millions of years of evolution to reach the level of unconsciousness and, in the case of humans, superconsciousness that we can reach. It needed us millions of years. If some people believe they can create a robot that can simply surpass life itself, well, they are crazy beyond measure. And, well, the psychiatry world is probably the only place where they can go. Because they most likely can't accept the fact that you create something without a structure, without any evolutionary structure, and you expect that to surpass any life form. You can recreate through code any possible behavior, but there is no awareness in that. You cannot create awareness in an AI, in a bunch of code that does nothing else than repeat itself. It has literally no flow of life. So the machine has a flow of life because it is life itself. It's not functioning the way we biological beings function, but it has a life of its own. And the point is, the AI itself that was created is part of that. It doesn't have a life of its own. It knows what it must do because it was given a code, right? It is just like the cells in the body and the organs in the body. They just know what they have to do and that's it. No more adaptation, no doing anything beyond that or below that. What they know is what they do and that's it. No adaptation, no evolution. When one merges AI with human potential and they create the idea of transhumanism, well, that's a whole different thing. But the mind is exactly like programming. No process in your mind can function without you consciously or unconsciously giving it the energy to function. When you're too obsessed with something, you're naturally giving those the energy to function. And just like any karmic structure means a cycle. It will come back again and again. That's why people end up in repetitive behaviors. And to transcend the repetitive behavior, one simply needs to let it flow. Because you are not forced to simply relive your past. The past has happened and nothing can change anymore. It is there in your memory bank. And that memory bank, because it is part of karma and obviously physicality and therefore cyclic existence, it will cycle back into your awareness again and again. By simply allowing that to happen and not focusing on that, but focusing on what makes you feel better, on what you currently and presently have to do, well, that karmic structure simply dissolves in time. It will still exist there, but it will enter a level of unconsciousness where it no longer hinders you. If someone doesn't know what to do when their mind bothers them, just try to stay still and breathe. It is a very complex thing to do because many people simply don't have the patience to just sit still and breathe. It is one of the most complicated things because if someone is so corrupted by their karma, right, they have created so many cycles that constantly struggle to become one with creation, so therefore dissipate, they will simply have they can't sit still for even half a second. There's always something again popping up in their minds. And that is why so many people are unhappy, right? So stillness is a very potent thing. However, a complex thing because it takes a lot of patience and practice to simply sit still and focus on your breathing. Because your breath is the most important part. If it is superficial, you're also superficial towards life. If it is complex, it is the hardest thing to focus on your breath. Try focusing on your breath for half an hour while playing your favorite video game, irrespective of how good or how bad you are at it. I assure you, you will forget about your breath like 30 seconds at most after starting. So, all this being said, well, hopefully this video was introspective enough. You are appreciated. Take care. Fair Engine Board signing out.